Hey guys, welcome to the shop. So I'm trying to think about which side to stand on. I think this side's a good side, don't you? So we're taking a break from our usual content. I'm going to do a tool review today. So please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And any feedback on what content you would like to see, what can be improved, what you want to see more of, and just anything really. I always appreciate it, and it's kind of fun interacting with most of you guys. I'm waiting for this channel to get big and then get a really typical YouTube comment section, but so far it's been really awesome. This is a Grizzly 4003G gunsmith lathe. I do use it as a gunsmith. This is my primary lathe. It's my only lathe. I've used my Bridgeport as a lathe and I didn't like it. But it's a good machine. They're really about $6,000 shipped, give or take. Sometimes they're on sale for I think I got a rebate because my stand sucks and Grizzly shipped me the wrong stand. I made it work. I think they gave me $500 or $700 back, but it was a huge fight. And I'm gonna run down the issues first. One, some of my supposed to be ground mating surfaces are not ground, like the right side dovetail on the cross slide is still rough milled. I've got a few things like that. I scraped the bottom of the cross slide, I scraped the bottom of the compound. My cross slide doesn't repeat like it should. I think it has to do with that mating surface. I'll re-scrape it eventually. The compound does repeat, so we're Gucci. Just do your roughing on the cross slide, and when you're threading, if you're trying to just rough thread, I will back in and out on the compound, and on my last couple passes, I'll back in and out on the cross slide if I'm trying to thread to dimension. Not the end of the world. I mean, you get what you pay for. I paid for an inexpensive Chinese machine. I got a cheap Chinese machine. Not going to be mad about it. They're in stock. They come with a lot of nice things. They come with a couple tool holders. They come with a quick change tool post. It is a piston type. It doesn't hold as well as a wedge type. It's on the to-do list to replace it with a wedge type, but it's not high enough on the to-do list. It's getting done in the next 6 months. Put it to you that way. Tool holders are pretty cheap. You can pick them up for about 18 or 20 bucks. They're BXA on eBay. The chucks are all right. I've got, depending on the size part in there, 2 to 5 thousandths of an inch of run out on a 3-jaw, and that's after 6 months of use. It was 2 thousandths on every size when it was brand new. But what's really interesting is I have the same amount of run out on the size parts I normally use, but outside of that, it's degraded. I have more run out on large parts. I'm not sure why, but one thing, when you buy machines like this new, take them apart as far as you're comfortable. Don't go beyond your comfort level, because if you can't get it back together, you're going to be an unhappy camper. Take everything apart and clean it. There's a lot of grinding grit in these. This actually wasn't too bad. It's gotten a lot more grit on it now that I've used it. The 4-jaw didn't have anything in it, which was a pleasant surprise. But the bearings on my steady rest grenaded really quickly, and I cannibalized the follow rest because it's not something I use to replace the fingers in that. I will make brass fingers at some point when I need them. I mean, it is annoying. You've got a follow rest, so the bore on that should be able to pass a 4-inch part, but the way the fingers are, it'll only take like 1 5/8. Oh, I gotta sit down. So, I mean, there's stuff like that drives me nuts, and that, I get why they did it. I think the average person buying one of these isn't really gonna work much more than inch stock. That gets pretty heavy for a hobbyist. And I think it's realistic that most people will never work parts that size, or I don't work parts that size that often, but it's nice. I like to pretend I have the option. And it's got a bunch of fit and finish issues. The fit and finish issues that really bother me is that the dovetails aren't done properly even to the standards at the factory, and there's taper in my ways. It's more noticeable with the tailstock. I have to adjust the clamping depending on where I am in the bed. like where it is now, if I move it back, the clamps need to be tightened, have a little more preload to them for it to clamp correctly. And you can feel it in the carriage. Saddle gets a little loose just past the tailstock. I mean, not the end of the world. I mean, you'd see that you'd actually see the opposite of that in a heavily used machine. So I'm almost wondering if that's a feature, not a bug. I don't know. Maybe Grizzly will chime in. You know, the ways on the machine are pretty good. Like when you have this level, I've dialed in and gotten like 2/10 over 8 or 10 inches of taper, which is great. I mean, I made a cylinder square just off the machine, and with no grinding, it was squared within half a thou over 10 inches, which is, for my uses, that's good enough for the girls I go out with. And you know, there's a lot of like little niggling things, but you can still make really good parts on it with all the problems it has. Like I change the oil on this every 3 to 4 months. I know Grizzly says like yearly or every 6 months. I'll probably do that after my next headstock oil change, but I like to be a little aggressive with oil changes because oil's cheap, bearing and gears aren't. And you can get a substitute oil that isn't the Grizzly or Vactra from McMaster Car for like 25 bucks a gallon instead of like 40 to 80. Which is what I did. It meets the specs well. I will probably use Vactra or I think I cannot remember, it's technically a turbine oil. I will probably use that in the long term once I'm down to, you know, annual or 6 months oil changes, because it does add up when you're doing changes on this. Like I go through a gallon and a half of whey oil every month, and because these machines might get oiled twice in a day if I'm using them all day, I don't really worry about using top of the line oils in that application. You know, the way the oil is injected into the dovetails is a problem on this. It's not done in such a way where there's any oil grooves or oil directing. Stefan Gertesvinter put oil ball oilers in the side of the machine to get oils directly down to the bottom of the dovetail. What I do is I put Zerks on there, and I use an oil gun at like 3,000 psi. So I'll get oil squirting out the sides of these anyway. So that's a way around it. I did pop out the ball oilers and replace them with Zerk fittings. I prefer Zerk fittings because they're what I have on the Bridgeport, and I can use the oil gun on this. Now the downside to that is if you're the type of person who only has a lathe and you use this for line boring or milling operations, you can't really fixture anything to the cross slide anymore. Now that is an issue for me because I have a 9x42 mil. So I think also the other alternative is removing the cross slide and replacing it with another cross slide dedicated for milling, which is a possibility. You could do that, or you could just, you know, replace the ball oilers with nice ball oilers and modify the cross slide in such a way where you can fixture to it. There's a couple different solutions there. So mostly this is a good base machine that once you address the kind of the dumb, cheaped out options, you'll be pretty happy with it. And I certainly am. I think that these are really fantastic machines. You can get a full-size, very capable machine on a hobbyist budget. Like, instead of buying your motorcycle, snowmobile, or whatever motor-driven equipment you would buy, you buy one of these. And I think for a lot of people, they'd probably have more fun with this because this is a 12-month-a-year machine. If you live in the north like I do, we basically have 6 months of winter, and there's only 5 months a year where it's really nice to ride your motorcycle, and it rains half the time anyway. So why would you buy a motorcycle? I know someone's going to tell me because blah, 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 but I'm not a motorcycle person. I work on them, and I will make parts for them, but I don't like motorcycles. complete aside. Now it's a good machine. If you're looking at this or the PM1236, I think the PM1236 does have some advantages. You have an 18-speed gearbox. You do basically have to treat that like you have to do change gears to get in and out of your ranges. I think the stand's a little bit nicer on the PM. Frankly, I'm not sure. I've never seen one in person. This is the only Grizzly lathe made in the last 10 years I've interacted with in person, and it's almost exactly what I was expecting to buy. There's actually a couple things that are nicer, there's a couple things that are worse. Like I said, the dovetail on this side is rough machined and not ground. Unfortunately, because of the way they're fit, I basically have to return the whole machine. And I don't want to do that because what I'm afraid of is the next machine might be worse. And I've already learned the quirks on this one. So that's something to be aware of. But also, like, the accuracy issues that come with that, if you're a hobbyist making the average hobbyist part, you're never going to notice. You're really not. That only becomes an issue if you're trying to hit plus or minus a 1 thou tolerance instead of a plus or minus 2 thou tolerance. And you can still hit a plus or minus half thou tolerance on this if you just use the compound. So, still works. You could buy a used machine that's probably in a lot worse shape. It might feel nicer, but when it comes to accuracy, and that's what matters, it might be worse. You know, the carriageways are great. There's nothing to complain about on those. They're ground nicely. And believe it or not, the bottom of the carriage is scraped, and so is the bottom of the tailstock. They're not scraped well, but they're scraped. And I'm not going to touch them because they're good enough. So it's like, if you're torn between this, like, I think Precision Matthews kind of has like the hobbyist cult around them, and they're like Volkswagen or Harley Davidson. And while based on what I've read on the internet, they seem to be an excellent product, I think that I would be hesitant to buy one used, and I'd be hesitant to buy one of these used, because I don't think they're the kind of machine that's going to tolerate abuse well. And I don't think this is the kind of machine that's going to tolerate abuse well. Now, fortunately, the motor overloads fairly easily in this, so I have crashed it a couple of times. And I crashed it hard enough once that I knocked the headstock out of alignment, I knocked the tailstock out of alignment. So that was an afternoon job to get everything realigned. So what I'm worried, if you make a habit out of doing that, like I think someone learning would, it's not good for the bearings. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you might not be able to tell the spindle bearings are bad. Like, the preload wasn't perfect from the factory. I had to adjust that a little bit. I've adjusted a few minor things like that. And I think a lot of people on the internet will read and will hear this and hear, oh, well, I gotta fix the dovetail on that. No, you don't. Even the kind of iffy Chinese manufacturing in this, if you're not really familiar with machine tools, you're gonna do a worse job than someone who's skilled doing a half-assed job. And I think eating your humble pie and knowing your limitations is a struggle for a lot of people. So what I'm wary of with kind of borderline hobby class machines like this is a hobbyist hears this, reads this, sees all the improvements someone else did to their machine, does them wrong on theirs, isn't happy with it, and then I go buy it. And as someone who really repairs people's toys a lot, you know, i.e. firearms, motorcycles, snowmobiles, excavators, people are absolutely not honest with you on how they broke something, and they're not honest with themselves about their limitations. Now, I have to be honest with myself about my limitations and say no to doing certain jobs, because I'm a shop. If I screw it up, I'm not just out that time I can't bill you for, I might be out the part I ruined. So it's good to understand your limits, and I think for someone, this is one of those things. You clean it out, plug it in, turn it on, don't touch it for a long time until you're familiar with it, and you'll be happy with it. You can get really good surface finish on this machine with the right tool. You just have to learn your feeds and speeds. It's nice, the 3-phase motors help with surface finish, but what's more important is knowing what you're doing. where I can get an almost mirror surface finish with the right speed and feed with the right carbide grind on it. You're going to abuse the tool, and you can only make 1 or 2 cuts like that before the edge is fried, but you can do it. You just have to learn how, and it's all about knowing your machine. And once you learn your machine, you can do amazing things on them, even low-end machines. And I just don't compare this to a $30,000 machine. Don't compare this to a used $30,000 machine, because an extremely well-maintained Monarch, Leblons, Clausing, Acra, Acer, all of those guys in the $30,000 plus price range will run circles on this. I mean, I've seen lathes in person where I could fit this on and turn it. Now those are a couple $100,000 new, and comparing this to the build quality on one of them, you will be absolutely disappointed. My 70-year-old Bridgeport's tighter than this, but my 70-year-old Bridgeport lived in a tool room its first 60 years, and for the 10 years before I bought it, it was in the back of a truck with 40 pounds of Cosmoline slathered on it. So while that's a 70-year-old machine, it's in extremely good shape, and the gibs haven't been shimmed. And my worst backlash, I have 11th hour backlash on the Y on that machine. It is super tight. I've seen new machines like this with worse. So it's like comparing it to not a top of the line, but like Bridgeports now, or once you put a DRO on them, I would basically be paying 25 grand to replace that. This is not a $25,000 machine, should not be compared to it. This is a $6,000 entry-level commercial or high-end hobbyist lathe. And you know what? It's great for that. If this is what you're looking for, buy it, you'll be happy. If you'd rather have the features that come with the Precision Matthews and have to deal with more change gears, buy that, you'll probably be happy. You know, the long and the short of it is they're good enough machines. And if you're looking for a good enough machine, you're a hobbyist, you know, longevity issues don't matter. You don't want to deal with 3-phase. Buy this, they're great. You plug it into a wall. I mean, shit, you could run an extension cord from your dryer and run one of these. I have this on a 20 amp breaker. I have it on a 20 amp breaker shared with 3 other machines, and because a 20 amp breaker will support 4 horsepower for a spurt, and most of the time you're running this, you're only using 1 horsepower. I've had this and my Bridgeport running wide open at the same time. It didn't trigger a breaker. That's cool, because my Bridgeport's only 1 horsepower. So, you know, that's like kind of great. I don't know if they make 15, I think they might make 15, no, I know they make 15 amp 220 breakers, but if they made like a 10 amp 220 breaker, you could probably run this off that. You wouldn't be able to follow the 80% rule to the letter, but this on a 15 amp breakers, that's all you need, and you don't need a lot of copper to do that, especially if you're in a municipality that lets it where you wire it yourself and you know what you're doing. If you don't have a short run and you can just surface mount and conduit, the barriers to entry on this are really minimal. So that's one of the big things too. Like, a lot of people want 110 machines. Oh, excuse me, bad back, getting stiff and old. I run everything on 220 in here because I don't draw as many amps. And when you're wiring it, I used a lot less copper. So it actually would have cost more when you're wiring for this much stuff to wire everything at 110 than 220. It's just standard household is 110, so that's what people do now. But again, getting into the weeds, if this is a machine you're looking for, buy it. Now, just for a sense of scale on how tall this is, I do have this on about 2.5 inch risers. I am 6'4", so with the risers in place, this is just a little bit low for me. I kind of wind up hunched over after a long day because this is just full extension on my arm to grab. So if you're a short bloke or a really tall bloke, bear that in mind. I would assume most machines are about the same height. I'm really hesitant with the machine that's top heavy to bring it up higher. What I actually do is I have 2 5-gallon buckets of wheel weights in the bottom of the cabinets, and it's actually bottom heavy now, which is awesome. And that made a big difference in surface finish and perceived rigidity, because that mass dampening absorbs a lot of vibration and counteracts the impact of a single phase motor and also road traffic outside, because I live right off a major thoroughfare, and if I'm actually taking super light cuts now, I try to time it when I know log trucks won't go by, because that will show up in my surface finish, especially with grinding. So grinding is something I try to do when there's not a lot of traffic on the roads. And again, like if you live farther off a road, you don't have to worry about that. You know, a heavier, more rigid machine, maybe I wouldn't have an issue, but I think that's a non-issue for like 98, 99% of the user base out there. Now, thanks for watching, guys. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And any ideas for what new videos you'd like to see, more tool reviews, more explanation on old iron, stuff like that. So again, thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it.